Have you ever felt like the political system is looking you straight in the eye, promising to work for you while quietly taking payments from someone standing right behind you? You watch a bill pass that makes your medications more expensive, your rent less protected, your job less secure. You feel that punch in your gut when you see another headline: record corporate profits, record lobbying spending, record campaign cash flowing to the same politicians who just voted against your interests. And you probably blamed yourself at some point. I should vote better. I should pay more attention. Maybe I just don't understand how policy works. Meanwhile, every election season, the same people tell you, this is democracy in action. This is representation. This is free speech. But then you notice something troubling. Policies keep lining up with the interests of those who can spend the most, not those who vote the most. You see drug prices stay high, banks get bailed out, tax rules full of loopholes that somehow never help you. And you're told that's just how the system works. What if I told you they're right? That is how the system works, but not by accident. What if I told you that the system of lobbying in modern politics is essentially the art of the legal bribe, designed, refined, and protected to transfer political power from the many to the few, while making you think it's all perfectly normal? My name is Pig, and I spend way too much time studying how systems of power actually operate, the hidden mechanisms that transfer wealth from many to few, the psychological techniques that make exploitation feel voluntary, and the legal frameworks that make it all seem normal. If you want to understand the real game being played instead of just accepting the official story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what we're about to unpack will be uncomfortable. It will challenge the idea that the system is mostly fair with a few bad apples, but it will also give you something most people never get: system awareness. And with that awareness, you stop being an easy mark. You become an informed observer of how power really moves. Here's what they tell you about lobbying. On paper, lobbying is just petitioning the government, a fundamental right protected by the First Amendment. Textbooks will tell you it's a vital part of democracy, an organized way for interest groups to provide lawmakers with information, expertise, and perspectives they might otherwise miss. The story goes like this. Lawmakers are too busy to be experts in everything. Businesses, unions, advocacy groups, and nonprofits all come in and share data, draft proposals, and alert them to unintended consequences. Lobbying, we're told, is neutral. Some groups represent corporations, others represent environmentalists, workers, patients, civil rights groups. Economists will tell you that lobbying can even make policy more efficient by aligning regulations with real-world conditions. It sounds reasonable, right? Who could be against lawmakers getting more information? Who could oppose citizens organizing to influence the laws that affect them? But if the rosy picture were the whole truth, you'd expect certain things to be true. If lobbying is just neutral information sharing, why is it a nearly $4 billion a year industry at the federal level alone? According to OpenSecrets.org, federal lobbying spending hit about $4.1 billion in 2022 and stayed around that level in 2023, dominated not by charities or citizen groups, but by corporations and trade associations. If lobbying is just everyone having a voice, why do the top spenders almost always come from sectors like pharmaceuticals, finance, tech, oil and gas, industries with direct profit stakes in bending rules their way? If lawmakers are just hearing both sides, why do policy outcomes so consistently line up with the preferences of economic elites and organized business, regardless of public opinion? A landmark 2014 study by political scientists Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page, published in Perspectives on Politics, analyzed over 1,700 policy issues and found that when the preferences of average citizens diverged from those of economic elites and organized business interests, the elites usually won. Let me repeat that. Your preferences as an average citizen have a near zero statistically significant impact on policy outcomes. Here's what the art of the legal bribe actually is. Lobbying is marketed as democratic participation, but in practice it functions as a sanctioned influence market, an engineered system where policy outcomes can be purchased through a combination of money, access, and revolving door. relationships. This isn't a bug in the system. It's the primary feature. On paper, direct bribery, here's a bag of cash, vote my way, is illegal. But the system has evolved a far more sophisticated extraction mechanism. You don't hand the politician cash directly. You fund their campaign through PACs and super PACs. You don't say vote for this bill or else. You say, our organization supports champions of business-friendly reform. You don't slip them an envelope under the table. You offer them a $500,000 a year job after they leave office, if they play ball now. Corporations and trade associations spend billions on lobbying firms and in-house lobbyists. Those lobbyists cultivate relationships with lawmakers, staffers, and regulators, often people they previously worked with in government. They help draft bills, amendments, and talking points, often word for word. They bundle campaign donations from executives and PACs. Lawmakers who cooperate get support, media cover, and career opportunities. Those who resist get targeted, funded opponents, negative ad campaigns, or simply frozen out of the influence network. The result, money flows from corporations to lobbyists and PACs to politicians' campaigns and post office careers. In return, policy flows from politicians to those same corporations in the form of tax breaks, subsidies, regulatory loopholes, and favorable rules. Think of it like a subscription model for influence. Corporations pay an annual influence fee through lobbying and donations. In return, they get a seat at the table, early access to draft legislation, and the power to quietly kill or shape any policy that threatens their bottom line. You, as an average citizen, technically have a voice, but no subscription, no lobbyist, no constant presence in the room. This playbook of influence buying dressed up as participation has been refined over nearly 2 centuries. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the original Gilded Age, railroad tycoons and industrialists openly handed out cash, stock, and favors to lawmakers. The Credit Mobilier scandal of the 1870s involved a construction company associated with the Union Pacific Railroad bribing members of Congress with discounted shares to secure massive federal subsidies. Public outrage led to reforms. Direct bribery became politically toxic. But the underlying incentive didn't disappear. Big money still needed to shape the rules. So the methods evolved. The modern era of legal bribery really began in 1971, when corporate lawyer Lewis Powell wrote his famous memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, arguing that the American economic system was under attack and that business needed to mobilize politically. In 1971, there were only 175 firms registered to lobby in Washington, D.C. By 1982, there were nearly 2,500. Today, there are over 12,000 active lobbyists. That's more than 20 lobbyists for every single member of Congress. In 1946, the U.S. passed the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act, supposedly to rein in influence peddling. But the law was weak and easily sidestepped. In 1995, it was replaced by the Lobbying Disclosure Act, which improved transparency but left huge loopholes. Then, in 2010, the Supreme Court's Citizens United v. Feck decision blew the doors off campaign finance restrictions, allowing corporations to spend unlimited money on independent expenditures. This spawned super PACs and dark money organizations that can spend unlimited amounts while hiding their donors. Here's where it gets darker. This isn't just about money and laws. It's about how your own psychology is used to keep the system running. Behavioral economists have documented several predictable human tendencies that the lobbying ecosystem exploits. Authority bias makes us trust people in suits with prestigious titles. When a policy expert from a think tank testifies in Congress, you're not told that think tank is funded by the very industry affected by the policy. Availability bias means we overestimate the importance of information we see frequently. Industries pour money into ads and sponsored content to make their perspective omnipresent. Status quo bias makes people prefer stability, so lobbyists frame any reform as risky or job killing. They design a specific emotional journey for you. Hope investment, doubt deeper, investment realization shame. You start hopeful about democracy, invest emotionally in the process, feel doubt when policies don't match public opinion, double down on partisan identity instead of questioning the structure, eventually realize the game is rigged, then feel shame at your own naivete. That shame keeps you quiet about the rigging. When you struggle with problems caused by lobbying, high drug prices, student debt, environmental degradation, you think it's personal failure, not systemic extraction. You don't talk to neighbors about corrupt legislation, you internalize the stress. This isolation prevents the one thing they fear most: collective organization against the system. Let's examine specific documented examples of how this extraction mechanism operates. In 2003, Congress passed the Medicare Modernization Act, creating Medicare Part D. On paper, this helped seniors afford medications, but the law explicitly forbade Medicare from negotiating drug prices directly with pharmaceutical companies. During the bill's creation, the pharmaceutical industry spent over $140 million on lobbying in 2003 alone. The chief architect, Representative Billy Tauzin, retired from Congress in 2005 and became CEO of PHRMA, the main pharmaceutical lobby, at a reported salary of around $2 million per year. This single provision has cost taxpayers and seniors tens of billions compared to systems where government negotiates prices. Officially sold as middle-class tax relief, this law primarily benefited corporations and high-income households. Open Secrets reports that in 2017, business interests spent over $3.3 billion on federal lobbying. More than 6,000 lobbyists worked on this bill, 11 lobbyists for every member of Congress. The corporate tax rate was slashed from 35% to 21%, leading to record stock buybacks rather than promised wage increases. The bill added roughly $1.5 trillion to the deficit, creating pressure to cut social spending. Ever wonder why filing taxes is so complicated in America while other countries make it simple? Intuit, maker of TurboTax, spent millions lobbying to prevent the IRS from creating a free, simple filing system. In 2019 alone, Intuit spent $2.5 million on lobbying to keep your tax filing difficult so they could profit from the solution. ProPublica's investigative reporting revealed this systematic effort to maintain profitable complexity. When you aggregate these individual cases, the scale becomes staggering. According to Open Secrets, total federal lobbying spending averages around $4 billion annually. But that's just the input cost. What's the output? A University of Kansas study found that for every $1 spent on lobbying for specific tax breaks, companies received over $220 in return. That's a 22,000% return on investment. Text to lobbying investment, $1 times $220, text e-tax benefit, $220. If we model this conservatively across the system, Textic annual lobbyings, 4B times Textic average ROIs, 25x, text 100B text and favorable policy outcomes e-dollars. Over a decade, this compounds to roughly $1 trillion in wealth transferred from the general public to concentrated interests through purchased policy outcomes. These aren't just statistics. That money represents families choosing between medication and rent, students trapped in debt, communities with crumbling infrastructure while profitable corporations pay effective tax rates in the single digits. Why doesn't this get fixed? Because the system that benefits from lobbying also controls the levers that could reform it. The same people who design and enforce the rules often come from the industries they're supposed to regulate. A 2019 Brookings Institution report documented that nearly half of retiring members of Congress since the 1990s have gone into lobbying or related influence work. Former regulators from the SEC, FDA, and other agencies routinely take jobs at firms they once oversaw, often at many times their government salary. Major media outlets are owned by corporations with their own lobbying interests. Think tanks that supply experts to TV panels often receive corporate funding. A 2016 New York Times investigation revealed how prominent think tanks accepted money from corporations while producing research aligned with those donors' interests. When you see independent experts testifying before Congress check their funding sources, a 2019 investigation found that 72% of academic experts testifying on financial regulation had undisclosed ties to the industries they were defending. The laws are written to enable this system. Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United equate money with speech. making it constitutionally difficult to limit high-dollar influence. Disclosure rules sound strict, but allow dark money to flow through organizations that don't reveal donors. Lobbying definitions exclude many forms of influence operations. These aren't loopholes, they're features carefully maintained to keep the extraction mechanism functioning. Now that you understand the blueprint, you can spot it everywhere. When you see grassroots organizations with names like Americans for Prosperity, check their funding. When politicians vote for policies that make no sense, ask who funded their campaigns. When complex legislation suddenly includes obscure provisions benefiting specific industries, recognize lobbyist-drafted language. Look for these red flags: bills with overwhelming public support that die quietly in committee, bipartisan deals that somehow benefit specific industries, former officials becoming highly paid consultants to sectors they previously regulated. Ask investigative questions reflexively. Who benefits? Who paid for this? What would happen if this loophole didn't exist? History shows that concentrated awareness can force reform. The progressive era reforms came after muckraking journalists exposed corporate corruption. Post-Watergate reforms followed public outrage at revealed corruption. Modern leverage points include supporting transparency organizations, public financing experiments, revolving door limits, and issue-based coalitions that unite people across party lines against specific lobbying abuses. Protect yourself by treating every expert claim as a prompt to ask about funding sources. Support media that discloses financial relationships. Build local communities focused on political education and mutual aid. Share information about how lobbying affects your community's schools, hospitals, and services. The art of the legal bribe, lobbying as an extraction mechanism, is just one tentacle of a larger system. The same pattern appears in regulatory capture, defense contracting, student loans, and healthcare. But once you've seen one tentacle clearly, you recognize the others. You're no longer just a voter hoping the right candidate wins. You're an informed observer of system design who can explain to others how the game is wired, who benefits, and what it would take to rewrite the rules. You were never the problem. The blueprint was. And blueprints, once exposed, can be changed by the same humans who designed them in the first place. Systems designed by humans can be redesigned by humans. But that redesign starts with refusing to accept the official story about democratic participation when what you're actually witnessing is the sophisticated privatization of public policy. The first step toward changing it is calling it what it actually is: legalized bribery operating under the cover of constitutional rights.